The clash of steel on steel echoes across the ages, a testament to the martial prowess of the Middle Ages. But what if we told you there's more to these epic showdowns than meets the eye? Join us as we take you back in time to uncover the lesser-known secrets of medieval combat. From the psychology of fear to the unheralded impact of peasant revolts, our list reveals the hidden truths that shape the course of medieval warfare. Number 10. Siege warfare, a game of cat and mouse. Sieges are among the most challenging tests of human endurance, pitting one side against the elements and the clock. But did you know that during the Middle Ages, besiegers sometimes resorted to psychological warfare? Take, for instance, the famous siege of Constantinople in 1453, when Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to the city. As the Ottoman army assembled outside the city walls, rumors spread among the Byzantines of a traitor within their ranks. This fear of betrayal may have contributed to the Byzantine army's eventual collapse, highlighting how sieges often became a battle of attrition and nerves as much as a test of military strength. To learn about other famous sieges of the medieval times, check out our list. Famous sieges of the medieval times. No. 9. Knights. Not always the valiant champions. Knights, the epitome of medieval military might, were revered as valiant champions of justice and honor. But behind the romanticized image of these armored warriors lay a stark reality. The life of a knight was not always as glorious as it sounds. For starters, being a knight required immense wealth. Only the upper echelons of society could afford the expensive armor and weapons necessary to engage in combat. Furthermore, not every knight was a master swordsman or a fearless charger. Many knights lacked extensive training and relied on their status to secure victories. And let's not forget, becoming a knight was a full-time occupation. Knights had to maintain their armor, train their horses and squires, and participate in endless jousting matches and tournaments. If you thought being a knight was all about glory and adventure, think again. It was also big business. No. 8. Battle of Hastings, 1066, a turning point in English history. On October 14, 1066, the Battle of Hastings transformed England forever. This pivotal clash saw the Norman army led by William the Conqueror defeat the Anglo-Saxon forces of King Harold Godwinson. While the battle is remembered for the legendary clash between William and Harold, the real victors were the Norman archers. Their volley of arrows decimated the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, breaking their formation and paving the way for the Norman cavalry charge that ultimately led to Harold's demise. This battle marked the beginning of the end for Anglo-Saxon England, leading to profound political, social, and linguistic changes. If you want to learn more about this historical event, check out our detailed list about the Battle of Hastings. No. 7. The longbow, a silent but deadly weapon. During the medieval period, few weapons commanded respect like the longbow. Originating in England around the 13th century, this behemoth of a bow stood over 6 feet tall and shot arrows that could pierce even the heaviest armor. Its deadly accuracy turned medieval battles into a game of cat and mouse as skilled archers took aim from afar. But the longbow wasn't just a killing machine. It was also a game-changer in tactics, allowing smaller, more agile English forces to hold their ground against larger opponents. For example, at the Battle of Crecy in 1296, a mere 1,800 English archers equipped with longbows held off an invading force of nearly 40,000 French knights. No. 6. The rise of gunpowder weapons, a silent revolution. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, a silent revolution was underway. Gunpowder weapons were making their presence felt on the battlefields of Europe. Cannons boomed, muskets crackled, and the era of knightly combat was drawing to a close. The introduction of firearms like the arquebus and later the musket gradually shifted the balance of power in warfare. By the late medieval period, specialized artillery pieces like the mortar and the culverin became integral to siege warfare, capable of hurling explosive payloads over castle walls. But the impact of gunpowder wasn't limited to siege warfare. As firearms became smaller and more portable, They found their place in the hands of foot soldiers. This evolution marked the beginning of a new era in warfare, one that would eventually transform medieval battlefields beyond recognition. No. 5. Infantry, the unsung heroes of medieval warfare. While the medieval imagination often conjures up images of charging knights and thundering siege engines, the true backbone of medieval armies lay in its infantry. These foot soldiers, often clad in simple chainmail or leather armor, bore shields and wielded pikes, swords, and spears. Their numbers were overwhelming. At major battles like the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where the English longbowmen and men-at-arms were outnumbered by the French, it was the humble infantrymen who made the difference. Despite lacking the flash and spectacle of mounted knights or the technological marvel of gunpowder weapons, infantry played a crucial role in many historic victories. No. 4. Castles, more than just imposing fortresses. When you picture a medieval landscape, imposing castles usually come to mind. But these architectural marvels were more than just symbols of power and defense. Castles were also complex ecosystems of social interactions. Life within a castle's high walls wasn't just about fending off invaders. It was also about forging alliances, managing resources, and engaging in politics. The castle's inner courtyard wasn't just a strategic hub, it was a microcosm of medieval society. The interplay between lords, ladies, knights, and servants created a unique environment where power dynamics shifted and alliances were forged. No. 3. Chivalry, beyond the battlefield. Chivalry, the medieval code of conduct for knights, is often portrayed as a set of honorable principles that governed warfare. While bravery and courtesy were indeed part of the equation, chivalry had a much broader reach. It was a reflection of the social norms and values of medieval society. Knights were expected to uphold certain ideals not just in battle, but in all aspects of their lives. From protecting the weak to respecting the sanctity of women, chivalry was a way of life. It dictated how knights should behave towards their fellow nobles, their rivals, and even their enemies. Chivalry was more than just a battlefield code. It was a lens through which the medieval world viewed honor, duty, and the role of a warrior in society. No. 2. Horseback riding, a skill of balance and bravery. Horseback riding played a pivotal role in medieval warfare, offering speed, agility, and a vantage point that was unmatched by other modes of combat. For knights, astride their powerful steeds, the art of riding a horse was more than just a means of transportation. It was a skill honed to perfection. Knights spent countless hours learning to ride, train, and control their mounts, forming a bond that was essential in the heat of battle. The ability to ride well was a testament to both the knight's courage and skill. After all, a knight's effectiveness in battle depended on their mastery of this ancient art. No. 1. Fear factor, psychological warfare in medieval battles. Fear, a potent weapon in the arsenal of medieval warfare. While battles were fought with steel and stone, they were also won in the minds of the soldiers. The psychological aspect of combat was often overlooked, yet it played a critical role in determining the outcome of a clash. Imagine the terror of facing an enemy brandishing a fearsome battle standard depicting a snarling beast, or the dread of confronting a charging knight clad in menacing armor. These images weren't just intimidating, they were designed to be so. Medieval armies understood the power of the mind and employed tactics to instill fear in their opponents. Whether it was through propaganda, intimidation, or sheer terror, fear was a constant companion on the medieval battlefield. Now it's time for you to tell us, what do you find fascinating about medieval warfare? Share your thoughts. Also, don't forget to stay tuned for more captivating historical insights. Forts and castles were the epitome of defense during the Middle Ages. They seemed almost impenetrable to invading armies, capable of withstanding siege after siege. But over time, military leaders grew frustrated with these stubborn fortresses, devising increasingly sophisticated methods to breach their protective walls. This led to the rise of enormous machines, both simple and complex, collectively known as siege engines or siege weapons, whose sole purpose was to batter down castle doors and enable the entry of soldiers into towns and cities. These siege engines were essential in deciding battles that could stretch over weeks or even months because they enabled the besiegers to smash walls, weaken defenders, and make gaps in the walls that allowed the charging troops to pour through. Although different types of siege engines have been developed and deployed across various civilizations throughout history, it was in medieval Europe that these instruments of destruction reached new heights of complexity and efficiency. And while there were many examples of these weapons, the main ones were the trebuchet, the catapult, the battering ram, and the siege tower. Siege operations were never undertaken lightly. Before even considering attacking a fortress, military leaders would send scouts to gather information about the town's defenses, location, and overall strength. Once it was decided to lay siege to a city, the job of finding the weak point in the city as walls would fall to the military engineers of the invading army. They would study the structure of the city, noting unstable sections of the wall or places difficult for the defenders to access. This was not always straightforward, however, as city walls were often designed with multiple layers of defense and ingenious mechanisms to mislead attackers. For example, some castles had false walls that concealed hidden structures such as barracks or latrines, or they might feature towers that blocked the line of sight, making it challenging to assess the situation accurately. Despite these challenges, identifying weaknesses in the city's defenses was crucial to the success of any siege operation. Once the target was identified, the besieging army would then transport the heavy siege engines to the battlefield, a process that could take several days in itself. Each piece of equipment had to be carefully maneuvered into position without causing damage to the machinery. Trebuchets in particular were so large and unwieldy that it took hundreds of men just to move them a few hundred yards. This logistical challenge highlights the significance of siege warfare in medieval military strategy, as the ability to transport and deploy these massive machines effectively was just as important as their design and construction. Despite the difficulties, however, the invading army would eventually reach their target and begin the arduous process of dismantling the city's defenses. Among the most famous siege engines of the Middle Ages was the trebuchet. This impressive machine functioned similarly to a giant slingshot, hurling massive stones or barrels filled with flammable liquids at the top of castle walls. To use the trebuchet, a long beam was initially pulled down into a hook attached to a heavy weight that hung from a frame. Then a basket holding the projectile was hooked onto the other end of the beam. After releasing the hook, the weight would slide down, pulling the beam forward and launching the projectile toward the target. The beauty of this design lay in its simplicity and efficiency, requiring minimal effort to launch a payload that could cause significant damage. During sieges, trebuchets would often be positioned far away from the city walls, sometimes more than 1,000 feet away, due to safety concerns. From this distance, they would hurl projectiles weighing several hundred pounds at the top of the walls, causing significant damage. The real terror began, however, when the trebuchet was used continuously for several days. Over time, this relentless pounding would create wide cracks in the walls, big enough for soldiers to crawl through or for larger projectiles to be pushed through. Eventually, the walls would become so compromised that they would collapse, opening a breach in the defenses that the attacking army could exploit. The impact of the trebuchet on siege warfare cannot be overstated. Its ability to deliver massive payloads with relative ease made it an invaluable asset for any military force looking to capture a well-fortified city. With each accurate throw, the trebuchet chipped away at the city's defenses, bringing it one step closer to being breached. However, the trebuchet was not the only weapon used by besieging armies. Another popular choice was the catapult, a similar machine that launched projectiles using a weighted arm that swung in an arc. Catapults came in various sizes, ranging from small handheld devices to massive war machines that could hurl objects weighing several tons. During sieges, catapults were often used to fling unwanted items like corpses or dead animals inside the fortress, a disgusting tactic intended to spread disease and demoralize defenders. By contaminating the water supply and creating a stench in the air, catapults helped to make life inside the fortress unbearable, encouraging the defenders to surrender as quickly as possible. Despite their effectiveness, however, catapults had limitations. Their range was typically shorter than trebuchets, and they were more susceptible to damage from enemy fire. Nevertheless, they remained popular siege weapons throughout the Middle Ages, serving as a useful tool for invading armies looking to weaken their opponents before engaging in direct combat. Another critical siege engine was the battering ram, a massive wooden structure designed to allow soldiers to approach the walls safely. It consisted of a long pole or tree trunk suspended on a wheeled frame and sharpened to form a battering head at one end. This instrument was covered with a protective layer of wood or wet hides to shield it from fire and arrows. A team of oxen or horses would move the ram back and forth, enabling soldiers to dig beneath the gates or smash them with heavy hammers. While seemingly simple in design, the battering ram was a crucial component of siege warfare, providing a much-needed level of protection for attacking soldiers. By absorbing the brunt of enemy attacks, the ram allowed soldiers to get close enough to the gates to dig undermining tunnels or break down the doors with less risk to themselves. This increased their chances of success, making it an essential tool for any military campaign that involved capturing a heavily fortified city. In addition to these offensive weapons, the besieging army would also use other tools to weaken the defenders. One example was the siege tower, a massive wooden structure on wheels that was slowly pushed towards the city walls. The tower was covered with fire-resistant materials like plaster and sand and had a movable bridge that extended to the battlements, allowing soldiers to descend and engage the defenders directly. Once inside the fortress, these soldiers would wreak havoc on the unsuspecting defenders, causing mass casualties and demoralizing the remaining troops. The combination of the battering ram and siege tower was particularly effective in breaching defensive lines. As the ram created openings in the walls, the tower allowed soldiers to enter the city quickly and disrupt the enemy's ranks. By utilizing both of these siege engines together, the attacking army could effectively overwhelm the defenders and capture the fortress. While the siege tower provided a way for soldiers to enter the city, the battering ram continued to play a vital role in weakening the walls and creating openings for the troops. The ram's ability to absorb the force of incoming attacks and provide a stable platform for soldiers allowed the attackers to maintain a steady assault on the walls, gradually wearing down the defenses and creating gaps that could be exploited by the elite charging troops. As the battle raged within the city, the siege tower and battering ram remained indispensable tools for the attacking army. Without these siege engines, capturing the fortress would have been nearly impossible. The fall of a fortress during the Middle Ages was often a lengthy and arduous process that tested the endurance and resources of both the besieging and defending armies. The besieging army had to maintain a constant supply of food and materials to sustain their troops and keep the siege operations running smoothly. Meanwhile, the defenders relied on their internal reserves of food and water to hold out as long as possible. The tension and anxiety would build with each passing day as the defenders grew weaker and more desperate, while the besiegers became more aggressive in their attacks. As the conflict dragged on, the siege engines played a pivotal role in determining the outcome. Their constant bombardment of the city walls and gates gradually wore them down, creating weaknesses that could be exploited by the attacking army. The battering ram was particularly effective in this regard, as its repeated impacts on the gates and walls caused the defenses to weaken over time. Once a breach was made in the walls, the siege tower allowed the attacking soldiers to enter the city and engage the defenders in hand-to-hand combat. The final assault was often a chaotic and bloody affair, but the defenders, weakened by hunger and fatigue, were unable to mount an effective defense. As the last of the defenders fell, the invading army would triumphantly enter the city, having secured a hard-won victory. The fall of a fortress was a testament to the power of perseverance and strategic planning. The besieging army's ability to maintain their operations over a prolonged period, coupled with their use of advanced siege engines, proved decisive in overcoming the stubborn resistance of the defenders. Siege engines played a critical role in medieval warfare, enabling invading armies to breach the protective walls of forts and castles. Weapons like the trebuchet, catapult, battering ram, and siege tower evolved significantly, becoming more efficient and sophisticated over time. Their impact on siege warfare cannot be overstated, as they allowed military forces to capture well-fortified cities and achieve their strategic objectives. The development of these siege engines was a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of medieval engineers and military leaders who constantly sought new ways to overcome the challenges of attacking heavily defended targets. Thank you for watching. Castles in the Middle Ages were formidable fortresses designed to withstand the harshest conditions and fiercest assaults. Once built by a feudal lord, they became symbols of his power and dominance over the land and its people. These fortifications were not merely high walls and towering keeps, but integrated defensive systems where every element was carefully planned to deter invaders, slow their advance, or even thwart their attack entirely. Among the most critical defensive features that made castles nearly impregnable were the massive stone walls. Built thick enough to endure the blows of trebuchets and battering rams, these walls were often constructed on slopes or elevated terrain, making it extremely difficult for attackers to approach. Some castles were also surrounded by water-filled moats, which not only hindered attackers from reaching the walls, but also prevented any attempts to tunnel beneath the foundations. Towers were not just observation points, but independent strongholds. Archers could fire arrows through narrow slits known as arrow loops, which were small enough to protect defenders while allowing precise shots at enemies. Moreover, the circular or polygonal design of towers made them more resistant to siege engines compared to square towers, whose corners were vulnerable to iron rams or hurled stones. The gatehouse, often considered the weakest point of any castle, was protected by multiple layers of defenses. In addition to the drawbridge that could be raised to isolate the entrance, there was a heavy iron portcullis that could be dropped swiftly to crush any assailant attempting to breach it. Some castles featured winding passageways with murder holes in the ceilings, allowing defenders to drop stones or boiling oil onto invaders below. These defenses were not purely physical. Clever tactical strategies were also employed. Defenders stockpiled supplies to endure prolonged sieges, and internal wells ensured a water supply if the castle was surrounded. Some castles even had secret tunnels for emergency supply routes or escape. To counter nighttime assaults, torches were lit along the walls to illuminate the surrounding area, making stealthy approaches nearly impossible. Additionally, some castles were equipped with murder holes, openings in the floors through which defenders could drop projectiles or burning liquids onto attackers nearing the walls. Thus, medieval castles were not just military structures, but complex engineering marvels that combined physical strength with tactical ingenuity, making their capture a near-impossible task without overwhelming numbers or cunning deception. So let's begin our exploration of this impressive structure from the outside and work our way in. As an attacker in the Middle Ages, your primary objective was simple: to reach the castle's main entrance and force your way inside. However, this seemingly straightforward goal was fraught with danger. Along your path, you would face an array of obstacles designed to weaken your forces, break your formation, and instill fear. One of the first lines of defense that you would encounter was a deep, wide moat filled with water. This was not just a decorative feature, but a serious impediment to any attacking army. The moat forced you to abandon your heavy equipment and pack up your siege engines. It also served as a natural barrier, slowing down your advance and providing the defenders with precious time to prepare for your arrival. To cross the moat, you would have to construct makeshift bridges or use boats, both of which were risky ventures. The defenders could easily flood the moat, destroy the bridges, or repel your boat crews with arrows before you could get close enough to build a bridge. If you managed to cross the moat, you would find yourself facing the next line of defense, the castle wall. This was no ordinary wall. It was a massive structure built from thick stone, sometimes as much as 12 feet high and 8 feet thick at its base, tapering to 5 feet at the top. The sheer size of these walls was daunting. Scaling them or bringing a battering ram to bear would be a lengthy process, giving the defenders ample time to prepare their defenses. And if you were unlucky enough to scale the wall, you would still have to contend with the arrow loops. These were small openings in the wall about waist height and 2 feet wide, which allowed archers to fire arrows without exposing themselves to the enemy. They were placed strategically to cover every inch of the wall and were designed to inflict maximum casualties while minimizing risks. If you managed to scramble over the castle wall, you would find yourself in a place called the Outer Ward or Bailey. This was the area enclosed by the castle walls and was usually crowded with buildings, including the barracks for soldiers, storehouses for supplies, and workshops for craftsmen. Your objective was still the same, to reach the inner ward or citadel, where the royal family or nobility resided. But now you had to navigate a maze of buildings and terrain designed to disorient you and hinder your progress. For example, the ground within the outer ward was often uneven and cluttered with obstacles such as wells, ponds, and gardens. This was done intentionally to make it difficult for your siege engines to operate effectively or for your troops to form coherent battle lines. You would have to contend with the second line of defense, which consisted of 2 imposing structures, a tower and a gatehouse. The tower was a strong and sturdy structure that served as a symbol of the castle's power and dominance. Its thick stone walls and high vantage point made it resistant to attack and provided an excellent lookout post. The gatehouse, on the other hand, was the main entrance to the inner ward and was designed to regulate traffic in and out of the castle. It was usually equipped with a portcullis, a heavy grating that could be lowered to protect against incoming attacks. Between the tower and the gatehouse, your chances of penetrating the outer ward were slim. Not only did you have to deal with the physical obstacles, but also with the psychological ones. The sight of the imposing tower and the secure gatehouse would intimidate your troops and dampen their spirits. The defenders, on the other hand, would be emboldened by the presence of these structures and fight with renewed vigor. Only if you were successful in breaking through the outer ward would you gain access to the inner sanctum of the castle, the inner ward. Here you would face the final line of defense, a formidable structure known as the keep. The keep was the heart and soul of the castle, housing the royal family or nobility and their court. It was usually the largest and most impressive building in the castle and was designed to withstand the longest and most brutal sieges. Its thick stone walls, high towers, and secure gatehouse made it virtually impenetrable. And if you managed to breach the keep, you would still have to contend with the final obstacle, the dungeon. The dungeon was a dark, dank, and claustrophobic place where prisoners were held before they were executed or ransomed. It was usually located in the basement or sub-basement of the keep and was accessible only through a trapdoor in the ceiling. To reach the dungeon, you would have to climb a rope ladder, which could easily be pulled up or cut, leaving you dangling in midair or plummeting to the ground. Once in the dungeon, you would be trapped in a place where sunlight never reached and where the air was thick with the stench of decay and despair. There would be no escape unless you were lucky enough to be rescued or pardoned. Thus, the castle stood as an epitome of resilience and invincibility, a testament to human ingenuity and determination to survive the harshest conditions and fiercest challenges. If you found this video informative and entertaining, please consider liking it to stay updated on our latest content. Thank you for watching. The art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu, Art of War. In the dramatic panorama of medieval battlefields, amidst the clash of steel and thunderous war cries, there existed a less apparent yet equally potent force, the land itself. Far from being a passive backdrop to the drama of human conflict, the terrain was a living, breathing entity that could make or break an army. Mountains, valleys, rivers, and forests were not just geographical features. They were strategic actors that influenced troop movements, unit deployment, and the very choice of offensive or defensive tactics employed by medieval warriors. The greatest commanders understood this nuance. They turned the land into an ally, exploiting its contours and features to gain the upper hand. This video explores how these commanders read the battlefield like a book, how they made the land itself echo with the sounds of victory. We will delve into specific instances where terrain was not just a physical landscape, but a decisive factor in the outcome of battles, sometimes even tipping the scales against conventionally superior forces. Join me on this journey as we uncover how the land itself fought alongside medieval warriors. At the Battle of Hastings in 1066, both armies arrived late in the afternoon, a mistake really, because back then, there was no official start time for the battle. So when William the Conqueror and his Norman army showed up at the bottom of Senlac Hill, opposite Harold Godwinson and his English troops, it was already late in the day. By the time both sides had deployed, it was nearly dark. But still, if William was going to beat Harold, he would have to get started soon. You see, military theory dictated that battles should ideally be fought on level ground, far from rivers or woods, open enough so that each side could display its full strength. But here they were, stuck on a hill, and not just any hill, mind you, but one with a deep ravine on one side and a gentle slope on the other. If Harold's men were to run out of arrows, for instance, they might try to flee down the south side of the hill, away from the ravine, and escape into the forest. Well, William the Conqueror wasn't having it. He would use the hill to his advantage. Now, with the help of the higher ground, William deployed his archers first along the crest of the hill, aiming at the center of the English shield wall. For the Normans, archers were essential, serving as shock troops who harassed, disrupted, and weakened the enemy before the heavy cavalry charged in for the kill. With the archers now positioned on the high ground, William's plan was clear. First, weaken Harold's forces with arrows and then crush them with his knights. On the other side of the ravine, Harold, the English king, watched his shield wall slowly buckle under the relentless Norman arrows. The shield wall, a tight formation of infantry, was designed to withstand the Norman cavalry charges, but it was not meant to endure a hailstorm of arrows. To protect himself, Harold ordered the building of a second smaller mound behind the main one, converting what was originally a simple rise in the ground into a defensive fortification. And that's how the English king spent most of the day, constantly under the stress of the Norman archers, compelled to stay on the defensive, defending his position on Senlac Hill. Now, sure, William the Conqueror tried a few cavalry charges, but they didn't work. So he waited, biding his time until finally, when he saw a chance, he launched a massive cavalry charge. But the hill didn't give him the total advantage he wanted. That's because Harold's men, thanks to their hilltop position, could see the cavalry charges coming from a mile away. So when the Normans came charging down the hill, the English had time to prepare their defenses. Still, the momentum was on William's side, and after 3 long hours of fighting, Harold ended up conceding the battle. The terrain at Hastings, though restrictive, had tipped the scales in William's favor. Despite the numerical parity between the two armies, the hills had amplified William's strengths and mitigated his weaknesses, granting him the upper hand in a battle that would change the course of English history forever. Fast forward about 300 years, and we find ourselves in northern France at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. It was October, and the ground was soaked with rain. England's Henry V was outnumbered, facing off against the mighty French army in a field near the village of Agincourt. The terrain, a muddy morass, favored neither side. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the waterlogged battlefield, it became clear that the muddy ground would play a critical role in the battle. As the English longbowmen unleashed a volley of arrows, the French knights came charging forward. Their heavy armor weighed them down in the thick mud, turning their powerful charges into sluggish advances. The knights struggled to keep their balance, let alone maneuver effectively. Each step was a battle against the sucking mud, and this unexpected obstacle rendered their superior numbers useless. Meanwhile, the nimble longbowmen, unfazed by the sticky situation, continued to pick off the French knights from afar. Victory went to the adaptable, those who could read the changing conditions of the battlefield and exploit them. In this case, it was the English, whose longbowmen proved more effective than the heavy cavalry charges favored by the French. But it wasn't always the predictability of open fields that determined the outcome of battles. Sometimes the most unexpected corners of the landscape proved crucial. In the heart of Switzerland's rugged Alps in 1315, a much smaller Swiss force prepared to face off against a numerically superior Austrian army. The Swiss knew they were outgunned. Their chainmail and swords were no match for the Austrian knights with their heavier armor and longer spears. But the Swiss had a secret weapon, the terrain. As the Austrians marched through a narrow mountain pass, the Swiss quietly rolled huge boulders and tree trunks downhill, creating a chaotic wall of rock and wood that crashed into the oncoming Austrians. The pass, usually a shortcut through the mountains, had been turned into a deadly trap. Caught off guard, the Austrians, with their heavy armor and cumbersome weapons, were ill-equipped to deal with this sudden obstacle. While their larger force offered some advantage, it also became a liability in the tight mountain confines. The tight gorge couldn't accommodate large maneuvers, meaning the extra soldiers became entangled and hindered rather than helpful. What should have been a tactical victory for the Austrians turned into a rout. The Swiss, making full use of their surroundings, managed to hold off the attackers, inflicting heavy casualties. This engagement at Moorgarden remains a testament to the Swiss military ingenuity and their understanding of their environment. They leveraged the natural barriers of the mountains to overcome a numerically superior enemy, proving that victory often lies not in sheer force, but in the clever exploitation of one's environment. And of course, let's not forget the role of rivers. Often seen as barriers, rivers could also serve as battlegrounds. In 1223, on the banks of the Kalka River in southern Ukraine, a mixed force of Russians and allied tribes faced off against the formidable Mongol army. Genghis Khan's grandson, Beta Khan, led the Mongols to victory in the Battle of the Kalka River, a battle that showcased the Mongols' incredible mobility and adaptability. Before the battle, the Russian princes hoped to lure the Mongols across the river, hoping to trap them a confined space and overwhelm them. However, the Mongols, skilled readers of the terrain, anticipated this move. They allowed the Russians to cross the river, leading them deep into the flat, open ground. Once across, the Mongols swiftly regrouped and surrounded the Russians. With the river at their back and the Mongols all around them, the Russian forces were trapped. Despite their valiant efforts, the Russians were defeated, marking a significant early victory for the Mongol horde in their expansion into Eastern Europe. But sometimes rivers could play a more nuanced role, providing defense and opportunity. During the 100 Years' War in 1346, the English, led by King Edward the Black Prince, were pitted against the French at the Battle of Crécy. The English chose a position near a small river at their rear, preventing the French from outflanking them. The river, while not a significant barrier, served as a deterrent, forcing the French to attack head-on. This maneuver not only put the English at an advantageous position, but also ensured they weren't isolated, a critical advantage given the lack of proper medical care in medieval warfare. The French, unaware of these fortifications, launched a frontal assault, resulting in heavy losses as they walked straight into an ambush. This battle was a turning point in the war, showcasing how knowledge of the terrain could transform a defensive stance into a springboard for victory. Then there are those times when the landscape itself seemed to favor unconventional tactics. Take, for example, the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 during the Scottish Wars of Independence. Robert the Bruce, the future King Robert the Bruce, utilized the rough terrain of Scottish lowlands to great effect. He deliberately lured the English into a quagmire of marshes and woodlands. There, the heavily armored English knights became entangled in the thick vegetation, losing their mobility and balance. Unable to execute their traditional charges, the knights became sitting ducks for the Scottish infantry armed with long weapons and sharp stakes. The Scots, familiar with the area and its challenges, used hit-and-run tactics, harassing the English, then disappearing into the thick undergrowth. This battle was a masterclass in exploiting the advantages of dense terrain, turning a potential English strength into a fatal weakness. Across the ages, military minds have recognized the importance of the terrain. But it's the commanders who've mastered the art of reading the landscape who've truly become invincible. From the Norman archers on Senlac Hill to the Scots in their marshy lowlands, the history of medieval warfare echoes with tales of commanders who turned the land itself into their greatest ally. The clash of arms echoed across the valley, the shouts of the combatants mingling with the screeches of falcons overhead. Men fought under a blazing sun, the heat making the polished armor almost unbearable. Each soldier's movement was a test of endurance, each thrust of the spear a victory over fatigue. But even this spectacle of human determination was about to be overshadowed by a force more powerful than steel, the fury of the sky itself. A dark cloud loomed on the horizon, heralding the coming storm. The first drops fell, testing the resolve of both men and machines. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that this was no ordinary rain. It was the opening salvo of an onslaught from the heavens themselves. Soon, torrents of water cascaded from the sky, transforming the battlefield into a sea of mud. The soldiers struggled, their armor now a burden rather than a defense, their weapons useless in the sucking mud. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a desperate struggle for survival, and as the night descended, the question wasn't who would win, but who would even make it out alive. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the craziest and weirdest facts from human history. Some of the most important battles in history have been decided not by generals' tactics or the soldiers' courage, but by the whims of Mother Nature herself. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the craziest and weirdest facts from human history. In the time before satellites, accurate weather forecasting was more art than science. But even with rudimentary tools, medieval meteorologists, shepherds, and sailors understood the importance of what we today call meteorology. They kept keen observations of the skies, the winds, and the tides. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, became a vital resource for those planning military campaigns, shaping the outcome of conflicts long before the first sword was drawn. Today, we are going to delve into this fascinating aspect of history. We will discuss how the weather was not just a backdrop to medieval conflicts, but an active participant influencing the course of battles and deciding the fates of kingdoms. Join us on this journey as we explore the tumultuous relationship between medieval warfare and the elements. The Siege of Paris, a pivotal moment in the Hundred Years' War, saw the English lay siege to the city in 1431. The objective, to force the French to surrender, but the weather had other plans. A harsh winter arrived early that year, blanketing the city in snow and freezing the River Seine. For the English, accustomed to the relatively milder climate of southern England, this was unexpected. But for the Parisians, it was a trial of endurance. The snowfall cut off vital supplies and made the river impassable, turning the siege into a battle against the elements. The English, ill-prepared for such severe weather, struggled with frozen equipment and dwindling supplies. This unexpected turn of events tested the mettle of both sides. It was a stark reminder that in the medieval world, as in the modern one, weather could be as unforgiving as any opponent. The Battle of Caronsebeş, fought in 1796 near Belgrade, pitted the Austrians against the Ottomans. On one side were the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, on the other, the Ottoman Empire. The stakes were high. Victory here could mean the end of Ottoman rule in Europe. The battle began with high hopes on both sides. But as the day wore on, it became clear that neither army could gain the upper hand. Then the skies darkened. A sudden storm rolled in, bringing with it torrential rains and thunderous claps of lightning. This wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a disruption from above, a challenge to the men fighting below. As the storm intensified, it disrupted the battle. The rain-soaked soldiers struggled to keep their weapons operational, and the lightning-filled sky made aiming and maneuvering almost impossible. The storm seemed to rage in sync with the battle, mirroring the chaos and confusion on the ground. It was a display of nature's raw power, a reminder that even in the midst of human conflict, the elements held sway. But the influence of weather on medieval conflicts wasn't just limited to disruptions like these. It also played a significant role in the outcome of engagements, often acting as a deciding factor in the heat of the moment. The Battle of Hastings, a pivotal moment in English history, took place in 1066. It was a Norman conquest of England under William the Conqueror. The opposing force was led by the Anglo-Saxon King Harold Godwinson. Both sides had their strengths and the battle was fierce. As the fighting reached its peak, a strange development occurred. A thick fog rolled onto the battlefield. This wasn't an everyday occurrence. It was a spectacle from above, a curtain drawn by the heavens themselves. As the fog descended, it concealed the movements of the soldiers, turning the battle into a confusing melee. It favored the Normans, allowing them to launch surprise attacks and disrupt the Saxon formations. The fog, in effect, became an ally, shrouding the victors in mystery and contributing to the downfall of the Saxons. Agincourt, a small village in northern France, became the site of a historic battle in 1415. The English under Henry V faced off against the numerically superior French army. The English, despite their smaller numbers, were better equipped and more experienced. Then the rain came. It started as a drizzle, but soon turned into a downpour. The ground, unable to absorb the deluge, turned into a muddy quagmire. This wasn't just rain. It was a baptism of mud, a baptism that would change the face of the battle. As the rain continued, the battlefield became a messy obstacle course. The heavy French cavalry, encased in their shining armor, struggled to navigate the mud. Their lances and swords, meant for open field combat, became less effective in such close quarters. Meanwhile, the English longbowmen, lighter and more mobile, found their range and accuracy unaffected by the mud. By the end of the day, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a scene of devastation and a resounding English victory. The Mongols, known for their military prowess, once attempted to conquer Japan in 1274, but they encountered an unexpected opponent, a typhoon. The Mongol fleet, sailing from Korea, was met with strong winds and waves as they approached the Japanese coast. This wasn't just a storm. It was a violent display of nature's power, a wall of wind and water that would change the course of the invasion. As the typhoon hit, it scattered the Mongol ships. Some were sunk, others washed ashore. The Mongols, caught off guard by the ferocity of the storm, were forced to retreat. This wasn't just a setback. It was a divine intervention, a kamikaze, or divine wind that saved Japan from the invaders. But the impact of weather on medieval conflicts wasn't just about immediate effects on battles or invasions. It also had profound implications for the strategies and planning of military campaigns. Generals had to take the long view, considering not just the tactical advantage of a battle, but also the seasonal changes that could affect their entire campaign. In the heart of the Sahara Desert in North Africa, Genghis Khan's grandson, the Caliph of Baghdad, planned his conquest of the region. His army was vast, his ambition even greater. But as he looked out over the endless dunes, he knew that his biggest enemy might not be rival sultans, but the elements themselves. For in the scorching heat of the desert, water wasn't just a source of hydration, it was a matter of life and death. The Caliph's forces, marching under the blazing sun, faced the constant threat of dehydration and heat exhaustion. Each step was a gamble, each breath a risk. The desert, instead of being a battleground, became a test of endurance, and it wasn't just the physical toll. The harsh environment also tested the limits of human resilience, pushing the soldiers to the edge of their endurance. What followed was a harrowing ordeal. Soldiers, parched and exhausted, stumbled through the burning landscape. Their bodies, baked by the sun, became vessels of human endurance. It was a struggle that transcended the battlefield, a silent war against the unforgiving terrain. And as the days turned into weeks, the fate of the Caliphate's campaign hung in the balance, dependent on the merciless whims of the desert. Medieval warfare was a precarious dance between strategy and chance, skill and circumstance. But amidst the clash of arms and the roar of the crowd, there was often an unseen force at play: the weather. From the torrential rains of Agincourt to the scorching heat of the Sahara, The elements played a crucial role in shaping the outcome of battles and the course of history. They added another layer of complexity to warfare, reminding all involved that on the battlefield, one could be victorious over one's opponent, but never truly master the unpredictable forces of nature. Now check out why World War II ended when everyone thought it would still go on for years, or watch this video instead. The clash of steel, the thunder of hooves, and the desperate cries of men under the weight of their armored foes. Warfare in the Middle Ages was brutal and unrelenting. But amidst the chaos and carnage, there were tactics so decisive they could turn the tide of battle in an instant. One such tactic was the cavalry charge. In this episode, we will delve into the world of medieval warfare and explore what made the cavalry charge such a potent weapon. What advantages did the horsemen have over their infantry counterparts? And how did the psychology of fear and intimidation factor into these thunderous assaults? Join us as we uncover the secrets of the cavalry charge and how it shaped the course of history. When we envision battles from the Middle Ages, images of heavily armored knights charging into enemy formations come to mind. But the truth is that warfare during this period was governed by multiple strategies and tactics. Despite this, cavalry charges stand out as one of the most effective and decisive methods of resolving conflicts. Several key factors contributed to the effectiveness of the cavalry charge. Let's begin with the obvious: horses. Horses played a pivotal role in medieval warfare, and their importance cannot be overstated. They provided a means of rapid transportation, enabling armies to cover vast distances quickly, a necessity in a time when battles could erupt unexpectedly and communication was slow. In terms of warfare, the use of horses provided several distinct advantages. First and foremost, horses, especially those bred specifically for war, possessed unmatched strength and speed compared to infantry. A well-trained knight could easily weigh over 200 pounds with his armor, yet his horse might be able to pull and push much more than that. With powerful stallions like the Great Horse of Denmark, war horses in the hands of skilled riders could deliver the initial shock that could disrupt enemy formations. Furthermore, horses could ford bodies of water twice as tall as the horse itself and travel up to 60 miles per hour. The mere sight of a fully armored cavalry unit thundering toward opponents was often enough to instill terror, especially among troops unaccustomed to facing such assaults. Another advantage of cavalry was the heavy armor worn by the knights. This protective gear not only gave them a significant edge in battle, but also contributed to their imposing presence on the battlefield. While infantry often relied on defensive formations, such as shield walls or long spears to repel attacks, well-trained knights could breach these defenses if their charge was executed at the right angle and speed. However, it was not just physical force that made the cavalry charge so effective. There was a psychological aspect to it as well. Knights held high social and military status in many European cultures. They were generally the elite warrior class, often fighting under the banners of nobles or kings. This prestige enhanced the impact of their charges, instilling fear and demoralizing the enemy. Moreover, knights underwent rigorous training and discipline, both in horsemanship and combat, which contributed to their prowess and morale in battle. Let's look at a famous battle where cavalry charges played a decisive role. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 is a pivotal moment in English history. It was here that William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, defeated the English forces led by King Harold Godwinson. The Norman victory was largely attributed to the effectiveness of their cavalry charges. At the start of the battle, the English, who had been marching since the previous day, set up camp while the Normans took up positions on higher ground. When the fighting began, the Normans used a feigned retreat to lure the English into a charge. Once engaged, the English, with their superior numbers, pushed the Normans back. However, this is where the cavalry charges began to take their toll. As the Normans retreated, they left gaps in their ranks. Seeing this, the English charged forward, thinking they had the upper hand. But this was exactly what the Normans had planned for. The English lacked heavy cavalry, and once they committed to the charge, they found themselves vulnerable to counterattacks. As the English advanced, the Normans regrouped, forming a shield wall with their cavalry on either flank. The shield wall absorbed the initial shock of the English attack, and then the Norman cavalry struck, breaking through the English lines. The result was decisive. Harold was killed, and the English resistance crumbled, leading to a Norman victory that would change the course of English history forever. However, as impressive as the cavalry charges were at Hastings, they didn't always guarantee success. Unfavorable terrain could diminish their effectiveness. For example, in 1138, during the siege of a castle in France, an English knight named Robert, Count of Gloucester, led a cavalry charge against the French. He and his knights rode through a narrow passage in the castle wall. Unfortunately, this passage led them straight into a layer of thick mud. The horses' hooves sank in the mud, slowing them down, and the knights were forced to fight on foot, eventually losing the battle. Similarly, as the medieval period progressed, advancements in weaponry began to counter the effectiveness of cavalry charges. During the 100 Years' War between England and France, the English longbow proved to be a formidable weapon. Longbowmen could shoot as far as 300 yards with deadly accuracy, which allowed them to target knights before they could launch their charges. These ranged weapons caused significant casualties among the charging knights, diminishing their impact on the battlefield. Despite these limitations, the cavalry charge remained a popular tactic throughout the Middle Ages. Its ability to swiftly decide battles and the awe inspired in soldiers and civilians alike ensured its continued use. In the Battle of Bouvines in 1214, a battle between French and Flemish forces against the Holy Roman Empire and its allies, a massive cavalry charge by the French King Philip II decisively won the battle, solidifying his reputation as the Lion of France. As the late medieval period arrived, the emergence of gunpowder began to transform warfare. The introduction of cannons and firearms posed new challenges to the traditional cavalry charge. Cannons could disrupt enemy formations and cause significant casualties, while firearms offered a new level of accuracy and lethality. However, cavalry units continued to play vital roles in battles, albeit in more evolved forms. Gunpowder did not immediately render cavalry obsolete. Instead, it led to a shift in tactics and the emergence of new types of cavalry units specialized in different roles. For example, some cavalry units began to focus on mobility and reconnaissance, scouting enemy positions and providing valuable intelligence. Others were equipped with light artillery, enabling them to provide fire support without the need for large cannons. In battles like the Battle of Caransebeș in 1479, which saw the armies of Hungary and Bohemia clash with the Ottoman Empire, cavalry charges were still a prominent feature. Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus led a charge that broke through the Ottoman lines, contributing to the Christian victory. In conclusion, the cavalry charge was an integral part of medieval warfare, combining speed, power, psychological shock, and durable armor to create a formidable weapon on the battlefield. While its effectiveness was not always guaranteed and it had its limitations, the art inspired and the decisive impact it could have on battles ensured its continued use for centuries. Even as gunpowder transformed the nature of warfare in the late Middle Ages, cavalry charges continued to play vital roles, adapting and evolving alongside the changing times. Now let's move to the comments section. What do you think was the most important factor that made cavalry charges so effective in medieval warfare? Was it the element of surprise, the psychological impact, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear your perspective. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more insightful historical tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and may the spirit of adventure guide your way.